My name is Charlie Pike. I am the Director of Platform Success at TPGI. I'm actually a long time in accessibility, and at TPGI I was actually one of the founding partners with Mike Paciello, who is talking here today. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is how to advance your return on accessibility with testing. And I will be talking particularly in the context of our platform, our accessibility platform, ARC. But I think a lot of what I'm talking about today is going to be applicable in a lot of different situations with a lot of different tools. And I'm going to be talking about, the challenges of testing and how accessibility testing is broken down, if you like, into its different forms. So the agenda today, I'm going to be giving you an introduction. Are we okay with the sound? Thank you. Going to be giving you an introduction to how we see accessibility testing, how it works, how it breaks down the different forms of testing and where to use them and so on. And then I'll be talking about a kind of a process or an evolution of how testing, I guess, develops in an organization, particularly an enterprise, but it's really true of all organizations. Starting with a discovery phase, where you find out where you are, really, in terms of your levels of accessibility, and you set baselines. And then a rollout to try and get testing across the organization, okay? And that is really the goal here. When we're talking about return on accessibility, it's really about trying to spread the load across your organization so the right people are doing the right testing. And then we look at what a mature state looks like. And we're thinking, obviously, in terms of testing, but it's true of accessibility in general. And then, hopefully, there'll be a bit of time at the end for some questions and answers. So anybody from TPGI who might be in the room is probably sick of this image that I have, which is my accessibility testing onion, or the analysis onion, which is how I kind of look at testing. And I use the analogy of an onion because this is really how it breaks down. You've got layers, and you're trying to peel back those layers all the time to peer into your accessibility. Okay? And you never get a complete or holistic view of everything. So you're trying to get the most effective view you can at any one particular time. Okay? And on the outer layer, we have what we call in our ARC world domain scans, but is really true of any sort of broad level scan. And we're talking here about automated accessibility testing. So we're talking about a scanning engine, scanning probably on a regular basis, maybe 100, 1,000, 10,000 pages at a time. Okay? And what you're looking for there in the outer layer of the onion is that broad picture. What are your top issues? What are the things that are most persistent? Where have you got a lot of issues versus somewhere else where you might not have so many? In other words, where to target your work and your further analysis. This is a kind of broad picture. A lot of people look at automated testing and are hoping that it's going to tell them everything about their compliance. It won't, okay? Everyone in the industry argues about how much or what percentage of WCAG you can test with automated testing. I think that's a bit of a, sorry, yes, a question? Oh, yes, sorry. So that question comes up a lot, but really I don't think it's the important question. I mean, that could be anything. Right, that figure could be anything depending on what you're testing at any particular time and with what engine. What matters is what you do with this data. And I'll be talking a little bit about how to effectively use that broad level scan, okay, to help you understand where you sit. The next layer is what we call user flows, and this is a tighter analysis, okay? So a user flow we typically think of as, say, for example, you're a hotel website, your booking flow, all the steps that a user takes to make a booking on your hotel site. That's a critical flow for you, and that might be something you prioritize straight away, okay? Whatever about our templates or our content, we want to make sure that our booking flow is fully accessible, okay? But user flow can also mean a tighter focus on things like templates or particular areas of concern. Okay? So you're doing a finer level of analysis. You're zooming in when you're doing user flows. And you can't do that with everything. Okay? And this is one of the things I want to be clear about. You can't do all the analysis you want to do all of the time because some of it is exhaustive and costly and so on. Which brings me to the next layer of the onion, which is our manual expert testing. What we call in the TPGI world engagements. This is the thickest layer of the onion, if you like, because you do the most work in here. You are usually testing against, for example, if you were auditing WCAG, against WCAG, then you would be testing against all the various WCAG criteria. And we say expert because usually it requires some level of knowledge or decent knowledge of what you're doing in order to test. Okay? You will not find your levels of compliance without doing some of this testing. But again, it's time-consuming. You can't test hundreds or thousands of pages, probably only 20, 30. So you need to be very strategic about when and where you do this. Okay? But it's probably your deepest level of technical analysis, I would call it. And the reason I sort of separate out technical analysis is because the next layer, which is the core layer, as far as I'm concerned, that gold nugget in the middle, is all about usability. How, whatever about the technical conformance, how accessible is it really? Is it easy to use? Is it efficient? Have we done things in the right way? And for that, you need to have your users involved in the testing process. And you have a few different ways. There's assistive technology testing, which is obviously not necessarily user testing, but it gives you a good sense of the challenges that users face. Okay? So it's certainly a step towards user testing. You have user feedback, gathering direct user feedback, basically asking them to tell you, is it accessible or not? And then user research, which is obviously one of the most effective ways to fully understand the use of your system. So you need all these parts of the onion to understand your accessibility. And you've got automated testing, you've got manual testing, you've got technical conformance testing. Are we compliant? Do we have the right tags? Are they formed in the right way? And we've got that user research part of that user feedback. This is all the bits that we need. So how does an organization move towards doing all of that and making maximum use of it, okay, to spread across the organization? So typically, we have a discovery phase at first, okay? And I'll be showing, don't worry, I'm not going to show you too many slides here. I am going to actually show you some testing in action, and particularly in our ARC platform. So we've got a screenshot here of a domain scan in the ARC platform, ARC being our Accessibility Resource Center. And we're showing some of the typical sort of visualizations that you have, pie charts, trend lines, and so on. The thing I'll emphasize here is we're trying to get a broad view. We're not trying to find out how compliant we are. Are we 50%, 60%? If you do that with this level of automated testing, you're probably misleading yourself because you're only taking a fraction of the tests and using that to gauge your accessibility. But they're very good indicators of accessibility. And then, as I mentioned, we have user flows. And user flows, here you'll see in this screenshot, we've got, instead of a whole broad domain, we've got a single component. In this case, we're looking at the Guardian website. And we're looking at a specific template, the sports section in the Guardian website there, as a sample of the whole thing. Okay? So in user flows, you can take a sampling, and that's an important part of testing. We do it all the time in TPGI. We try to get things that are representative of the whole so that we can look at them in detail. Okay? So they're important assets. Once you've identified those, they help you. I feel like almost the canary in the coal mine to tell you where you might have broader problems. And then that third layer that I talked about, the engagements or the manual expert audits, you're getting the same kind of data, but again, on a very small select set of components. So when TPGI, we do audits all the time, all day long. We've been doing it for years. Most of our people are engaged in audits at any one time. And we have a whole process around selecting what we're going to test. It has to be representative of the UI of a particular application, okay? Because we're not going to test all the screens in an application unless it's very small, or a website. So we have this process where we select representative samples and we test those and we use those to identify all the various unique accessibility problems that you might have. Okay? So again, it's about being efficient about testing. And then finally, we have a feature in our ARC platform called JAWS Connect, which we're able to offer because in Vispero, obviously, we make JAWS as well. And this is actually an addition to JAWS. And when the JAWS user comes to your website, if it's being monitored by ARC, JAWS users will actually have the option to provide feedback, which then goes directly into the ARC dashboard, instead of not just a sort of inbox, but actually to the people who are actually responsible for the accessibility of the site. So it's quite an effective way of gathering feedback and one step towards getting that sort of user feedback aspect. So once you've done this at phases of analysis, you should start to get a very, very good picture, particularly of where you sit now. And you really want to get a baseline. You want to understand what's my current state. No matter how bad it is, you want to get a really clear picture of your current state, because only from there are you going to be able to understand the changes and your own processes. And we work with, obviously, a lot of organizations, and the hardest thing for many organizations is to understand themselves and how they're set up and how they work in terms of accessibility. So getting that picture is all part of it. And once you have that picture, then you can start to think about how you roll that out to your organization. A lot of organizations get stuck in that sort of ghetto where they have an accessibility team. That accessibility team morphs and changes over time. People leave, people come back in. But they are largely responsible for all of the accessibility testing. And they tell their teams, usually, ad nauseum, you've got to fix this, you've got to change this. To move away from that, actually, one of the most effective ways to do that is to start with testing. Okay? Whatever about fixing, start with the actual testing process. And one of the ways is obviously to use APIs to include testing in your pipeline, so that when you're releasing code, you're running a certain number of tests, and we'll show that to you in a little bit. We also have tools like the ARC Toolkit, which is a browser plugin. We have a screenshot here. It's easy to roll out because it's a free plugin that everybody can install on the desktop. It doesn't need any connection, so you can install it in deep levels of your environments wherever you need it, and allows developers to run their tests on demand, on their templates, on their code or their staging code or whatever. Run the same tests, check their stuff, fix it, check it again, and so on. Easy way for them to do testing. Same for content authors. And we also have a node package for testing in your CI/CD pipeline, for instance. And then finally, we also have a Zapier integration in ARC, which allows you to do things like create bugs in Jira or create connections with your various apps and your business processes very easily to get this stuff out. Again, the goal here is always to both spread the load across your organization, which also builds awareness and competence, but it's also to push upstream. Okay? The more accessibility work you do, particularly testing work, upstream at the start, even as far back as your design process, the less cost you're going to have at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, it might be the difference between success and failure, because sometimes trying to do this, having tested production when the code is already out, you've lost already. Things have moved on, deadlines are too tight, you simply can't fix these things in time. So it must go out across your organization, and it must also go upstream in your development process. So I just wanted to show you, before I show you some actual examples, of what a mature accessibility assembly line might look like. Now, this is obviously assembly lines in different organizations are all different, and this is only a sort of illustration using our tools, but you'll get the idea. So we have, at the start of it, we kind of have a monitoring process. This would be something typically done by the accessibility team, usually, their oversight, their governance of the program, and they're watching. So they're tracking progress, they're prioritizing the set policies. You'll note they don't really or shouldn't really be getting down into individual issues or problems on sites. They should be looking at overall progress and trends. In an ideal world, that's where you should be, okay? Then you know the system is working. Again, you have the JAWS Connect, so you're getting the user feedback as well to help prioritize. And then in your planning phase for any build, you might use tools, for instance, like our JAWS Inspect or JAWS to do further prioritization and testing based on user feedback. And then you might use things like the toolkit or the API to test your code, okay? And that's what I mean by upstream. In the ideal world, before code gets committed, there's at least some accessibility testing going on, and things are pushed back. They don't get committed unless they pass a certain amount of tests. And I'll be showing you some ways that you can do that effectively without overwhelming your developers, okay? And then things come out to test, and you should be catching problems again with integrated testing and with things like JAWS Inspect to check them, pushing back again if they don't meet the requirements. And then you're monitoring your production environment all the time, scanning on a regular basis to see what happens. So if you've directed your teams to make an improvement, let's say this quarter we're going to improve the keyboard accessibility, you want to see the effects of that at this level in the monitoring, and then push out new directives and so on from there. Okay? So I'm just going to switch over and let's have a look at some of this in action. So as I said, I was going to show this to you in terms of the ARC platform. So here's the ARC platform here. This is what we call the client platform, or the client portal, excuse me. So ARC, Accessibility Resource Center, is a platform. It's not, we never call it a product. It's a SaaS platform. We don't call it a product because there's really a lot of parts to it. I showed you the toolkit there, the API. There's lots of different ways that you can integrate with it and work it. This client portal is kind of where it all converges and comes together, okay? And all the parts here are all the things that you need to run the program. So we've got our analysis, which we put in workspaces. We've got our knowledge base, which contains articles on all aspects of accessibility. And that's actually maintained by our Knowledge Center team, who also build our rules. And this is all they do. So they're constantly editing and improving this content on a daily basis. And this is interweaved throughout the platform, so it's available in context wherever you need it. I'll show you an example of that. We have training for going beyond fixing things to actually embedding the skills and knowledge that you need. And finally, a help desk service where you can connect with our consultants where you've got particularly difficult, challenging problems that you need addressed. But we're going to focus here on, obviously we're talking about testing today, so we're going to focus here on the analysis part in our workspaces. So I talked about the onion and the different layers. Outside, the outer layer is our domain scans, our broad level scans, and this, our demo site here, Awesome Store, as we're calling it, it's got a domain scan and user flow scans, which, as I mentioned, were much more focused, okay? So we have, for instance, it's a shopping site, so we have our search and add to cart process, which is going to be the key for us, and that has all been recorded using Selenium, and we're scanning that on a regular basis. And we've also pulled out a specific section, the product pages, that are core to the site for particular analysis. And finally, we've got an audit that was done on that particular store. So these are all the different parts of the onion that we talked about. Very important to note here this is all based on one rule set, okay? And that rule set includes both the automated tests and the manual test. It's all of our rules for meeting accessibility. So that means that you can compare this data like with like. And you can start to draw conclusions. I mean, already we can see where we've got particular problems. You can break down your top WCAG priorities, things that are most widespread. Again, those come from automated tests. So you have to understand that, obviously, when you look at it. And our top assertions or top failures of our rules, such as no link text and so on. So you can start to prioritize straight away across the board. Again, you're trying to get that slice view of what are the important things. But the fact that we're using consistent rules means that we can be efficient, which is my main point here. You can't, as I said, test everything. You certainly can't do manual analysis of everything. So you use the automated testing to help you identify what you're going to look at in more detail. And you're doing that constantly. It's a very efficient way to use the likes of these domain scans. So looking at a domain scan here, we've got our WCAG density score, which is essentially an average of all the WCAG failures across the test set, if you like, the number of pages we test. And we use it to gauge density, so how widespread the issues are they in templates or are they in individual sections of pages, etc. And we're scanning a fixed set of URLs each time because, as I said, we want to get a baseline. We don't care too much about anomalies. We want to understand what's standard for us. And you can see for this web store site that they've been doing reasonably well on this trend line that I'm showing you here, but they've recently gone up quite a bit. Now, this trend line, I think, is the main view of any of these tools. And what you might decide is just go back to the teams and say, what happened then? Did you introduce a new component? Did you change the design? And if so, maybe it's just a case of going back, testing it for accessibility and fixing it. Okay? So you may not even be interested in what the problems were, only when they happened. But this is where you monitor your progress. You've got bar charts, etc. We also pull out the priorities based on this figure here, this 88%, is these three issues, priority 1, 2, and 3, make up 88% of the total failures found, or the total WCAG failures found. So immediately you can start to see what are your priorities. And if we look at this no link text issue, immediately you see that that trend line is actually matching the trend line on the front page. So you can tell straight away that that's probably contributing majorly to that actual bump in the accessibility score. Our knowledge base, as I mentioned, is right there in context, so we can immediately see how to fix that issue, who it affects, how to test that issue. All the information about the issue is there. And we can see that the issue actually occurs fairly consistently across all the pages we've tested. So that immediately tells you that this is a global item. It's probably in a header, a footer, something like that. And you can tell from this view very quickly, if you know your site well, what problem you might actually have. So if we dig into this a bit more, we'll see the overall density score for the page, and then we can dig down and see where the issue occurs. Now, as I mentioned, you may not be terribly interested actually in the specific code because you're monitoring a whole program here. And what you might do is go over to your teams and say, look, we've clearly got issues with that page, so go and test it with the toolkit. Find the issues. The toolkit, a different kind of tools, you don't really need to know your WCAG criteria very well. It's set up with topics that are familiar to developers and content authors. And here's our issue, which it quickly visualizes for us. Again, we're testing with the same rules, so we're running the same tests and we should get the same results. And I can dig right into my code and find out where the issue is, fix it, and go back. And then in our production environment, what we should be seeing is improvements all the time in those issues. We're monitoring, and we should see that the issues are addressed and our trend line improves. We go back to our dashboard. So already this is a way to start spreading the testing effort that's very straightforward. Okay? We've seen, and we can see from the toolkit there, that there's a lot of issues in the header. So what they've done here in this site is they decided to pull that header out into a separate user flow, where we're just looking at specific components like the header. And now, straight away, the WCAG density score is much higher here. And the reason for that is we've kind of boiled off the other stuff, and we've managed to find some of the templates that are contributing most to those accessibility issues. And so the level, the WCAG density has increased. So now we've got a good test set of components, our home page, our header, our footer, and so on, that we can look at in more detail analysis. We have one customer, a university actually, that were using these user flows very effectively as a kind of view of the students' path through the university. So they would log into the university portal, they would go check their email, go check their assessments, and so on. They would do little tasks throughout. All of these became user flows that they monitored. And where you had failures, they could see how that affected the user's journey. So, okay, they can get into the portal, but they can't get to their assignments. Why? What's wrong with that app? Let's analyze that. So it's a way of building cross-sections across all of your stuff from a user's point of view. There's lots of ways of doing user flows, but that's one very good example. So we focused on that, and then we've identified that the header, for example, is a particular problem, and what we're going to do with that then is do an engagement or a manual accessibility review. Okay? And this, as I mentioned, is the most detailed view. You're testing against all of the various criteria. And we're getting more detailed notes on the issues. So we have our automated issues as well. Okay? You can also do that automated testing to speed up the manual testing. And we've got detailed auditor's notes on the problems. There's our image that's causing the accessibility issues in the header. And here are the examples here. We also include some output from our JAWS Inspect tool to show you what a JAWS user. This is a transcript of JAWS reading that header. Okay? So you get a very good sense immediately of what that is like for a user. Does it make sense? Does the order make sense? And you can see problems with repeated links here already in this transcript. So now we've got a complete view, and as that team starts to modify and fix things based on the audit that we did, because we set that up as a user flow, we can monitor their progress. So we can see, are they going in the right direction? They've got their full report, they know all the technical issues that they need to fix, so the trend line should improve over time. If it doesn't, maybe it's time to get back to that team and make sure they understand the report and what they're doing, and maybe they need some training. Okay? If it is going in the right direction, you can use this to eventually see whether they've got to the end, and then go in and do a retest, and finally verify that they fixed everything correctly. So these are the kinds of ways you can use the automated and the manual testing efficiently to spread the testing across the organization and also achieve the best view possible of your accessibility. So now you're rolling out and you're trying to get more testing done across your organization. You've done all your various forms of analysis. I forgot to mention, I wanted to show you the JAWS Connect. So, as I mentioned, with JAWS Connect, the JAWS user comes to the site that we're monitoring, the web store, and gets a notification that they can provide feedback. They don't have to do anything. Okay, they're just alerted to that. If they choose to, they go to a feedback form, a new window opens, they quickly fill in that form, and the output from the form goes directly to the dashboard. So in this case, a user has pointed out that there's a form on a page that is not usable. It's got unlabeled elements. And you can now go to that page in Arc, verify that those missing labels are there, and you already know that users are being affected by that issue. So you could integrate that user feedback. But another thing you can start to do, and this is really key, is you can start to get your teams testing and start to put gates in your testing pipeline so that you can control to some degree the testing work. So we have a thing here called test initiatives. And what that means is you might look at some of your priorities, for instance, down here, and decide that you're going to address them. Okay? And test initiatives are essentially projects. So, for instance, we've got fixed tab order here. We've got fixed header icons, which we saw was a problem we found in the audit. And you can set a date and say, I want it fixed by this date. And my policy is 0 tolerance. I want it fixed. Or percent improvement. I want it better by 10%, 20% each time I scan. And it's a way to break down the requirements. Rather than hitting your developers with everything at once, they can use the API, for instance, to set up a gate that says, if you don't pass this icon testing test, then you don't commit your code. Okay? And if they're successful, maybe you give them 2 more next release, and so on, and you build up the testing and the work over time. So you don't hit your developers with everything, you hit them a little bit, and they start to learn about accessibility and accessibility requirements. That's a great way to break things down. And the other thing, obviously, I mentioned the Zapier integration, is to start sending out things like bugs. For instance, if I zap this assertion now, and I've created a connection through Zapier, and if I just... So we're in Jira here, and a new issue has popped up in Jira. And the versatility of this is you're sending the issues to the right people at the right time. The right teams, for example, are getting it. And you can set this up with any different versions of Jira, different versions of various applications. The whole Microsoft suite, the Google suite is all supported by Zapier. So you can build a workflow to go wherever the information is needed. You can send an email to the boss. You can build an executive report for your executive team every time you're doing reporting. The same data can go out to the different parts of your organization as you're testing. So again, just going quickly back to our slide deck, we want to get to a point where we are monitoring, and we're really monitoring a running program where most of the work, most of the testing work is actually being done further upstream in your pipeline, rather than by your accessibility program team. And as that testing is going on, your teams are becoming more and more more used to and skilled at doing the accessibility work as well as the testing work. Because testing, they really learn a lot about accessibility. And then finally, you do want to get to a point where the teams themselves are actually doing some of this manual testing. And we do, as part of ARC, we also have a guided testing tool, including a plugin, that allows you to do that manual testing. And as they do that, and you can introduce them gradually into that, then again, you're spreading the workload and spreading the knowledge. Because if they know how to do this testing, they're understanding a lot much better what accessibility is and what the requirements are. So I know I haven't left us very long for questions, but we've got a few minutes. If anybody's got any questions for me. Yes, over on the far left here. Absolutely, and it's a very good way, and it's a very, yes, I will, of course, yes. So he's working at a university, and they want to increase the amount of testing done by, for example, professors, authors, and so on, and they want to be able to see, is that testing and fixing actually effective? Are they doing the work? So how do they track their progress, if you like, with that work? You can absolutely use these tools. For instance, I showed you the toolkit there, which is a browser extension. I need to come out of this, which is very easy to install, and it's set up in order, again, you don't really need to know your WCAG or any of the details of technical accessibility. It highlights things for you. It makes them very clear. I'm highlighting the headings on a page here, what those issues are with simple explanations. People, content authors, professors creating content. Oh, I know in universities, professors are often putting up a website a day sometimes. They can check these things very simply. And then because you're using the same rules to test, then when you monitor these sites in a broad level, and you might be, monitoring lots of sites at any one time, you can see with your trend lines, your pie charts, and so on, where that work is being effective or not, okay? And you should see things improving. You may, at the very start, need to take a sample of some of the contents and some of the authors that you know to see end-to-end, are you getting a proper view of it? But then once you've established that, you can roll that out across the university and really see whether the work is progressing. So yes, absolutely you can. Yes? Sorry, I can't. For desktop testing, do you mean desktop applications? Not many. So the question is, do we have tools for testing desktop applications? JAWS Inspect is a desktop application, which we use to do JAWS testing specifically for testers of JAWS. And it gives you transcripts of basically what JAWS would say when you were using the application. And that you can use to test anything really on the desktop on which JAWS runs, because it is essentially JAWS for testers. But that's really the only desktop tool we have. But you can also test PDF documents with that. Yes, one more question down here. Is the JAWS Connect used by JAWS? Is the toolkit used by JAWS users? Yes, it can. We have JAWS users on our team using it. Yes, another question.
What are the capabilities of this tool for mobile testing?
So we have a mobile tool on its way. It's being beta tested at the moment, particularly aimed at developers. So we are starting to develop mobile tools. We've been kind of waiting for a bit more maturity in those platforms, and particularly testing tools, but we are developing them. It's worth noting, though, that at the moment they won't be connected to dashboards like this, and that's because we can't scan, we can't go out and crawl mobile applications. So they will be in your development and testing environment, rather. Time have we got? Yeah, soon. It's being beta tested, so basically, once we've resolved all major issues, it should be available. So we're imminently, I would say, imminently. Yes.
So what platforms on mobile support both iOS and Android?
At the moment, Android. First will be Android. iOS will be hot on its heels. Yes.
Is it possible to integrate these tools as part of CI/CD pipeline?
Yes, yes. So we have a Node.js SDK, which allows you to integrate with any kind of automated Selenium-based tests that you might be running in your CI/CD pipeline. We also have the API, and your toolkit can test any kind of templates that you produce. So yes, I probably need to call a halt to this because we're on the hour. Maybe just one more question. All right. Yes, absolutely. It does. And you can transform it. That's the nice thing about having things like the API. You can transform it into your standard reports. We have one customer building Tableau dashboards, another customer who does risk reporting and includes accessibility in their risk reports. And so they just use the API, pull the data out of these dashboards, and integrate it that way. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Much appreciated. And if you have any other questions, do come up. Thank you. Thank you.